Well, in the recent New Zealand election, there was like a tsunami in the regions, turning blue seats traditionally towards red. Richard Rennie has covered this extensively in this week's Farmers Weekly, collecting a lot of views from younger farmers and the election outcome overall. Was it due to shifts in population profiles in regional towns around New Zealand? Or was it a desire for stability during a crisis to keep the same government? Or the one I've heard the most, locking out the extreme and dangerous Greens and the ideology away from another coalition going forward. Regardless, it was a red wave of Labour votes that washed across this country's rural electorates this month, and a historic victory since the introduction of MMPs. So where to from here for the next 3 years for the primary industries and rural New Zealand? We're joined by West Coast Tasman elected MP and Minister for Agriculture for the Labour Party, Damien O Connor. Evening, Damien. And firstly, can we extend a congratulations on your election within your electorate?
I think it's always great to have a mandate from your local people, and it's, I guess, something I've enjoyed for a wee while now, and thankfully they didn't tire of me, not at this point anyway.
Well, let's talk about that first, though. There is a decline in the recent statistics around the population on the coast, and there was a lot of upset on the coast from rural coasters around the freshwater policy and how deeply affected the Indigenous biodiversity was going to be on them. What will be your intentions over the next term to represent them deeply?
Look, the West Coast, like Northland, like Southland, Otago, are all different, and the freshwater policies will have different implementation requirements, and there'll be farmers in those areas that are doing the right thing and some that have to make some changes. I don't think the West Coast is any different. Clearly, we have a lot more rainfall, so the application of those will be different, and we don't have the nitrate build-up in our region, but we still have to ensure that we have good on-farm practice. In terms of the biodiversity, the significant natural areas has been a requirement in the RMA for about 30 years, and some regions have got on and done it, and the West Coast has yet to do it. So we're working our way through that. Indigenous biodiversity, I think that's a growing appreciation of that. We have a region full of a lot of it, some of it's still on farms, so we're just working through with farmers to sort that out. But it's basically a regional council, district council responsibility, so as central government we'll have to work alongside them to make sure that it's implemented fairly.
What about infrastructure on the West Coast? I mean, with the Provincial Growth Fund tipped to be scrapped, where is the funds coming to build back up the West Coast that's traditionally relied heavily on mining as well?
Look, we've got a whole lot of Provincial Growth Fund money in the pipeline there, committed to building bridges, to support for flooding. There's been a lot spent on cycleways, on roading as well. So a lot of that's still to be spent, and so we'll enjoy the benefits of that infrastructure investment, into the future. In terms of mining, there's still some alluvial gold mining operations there, and the price of gold is good at the moment. There's still a few coal mines, but of course the price of coal is going through the floor, and that's no good for them. So got a big mixed bag with mining, but as it's always been in that industry, it's ups and downs. There are people losing jobs, people getting new jobs. It's wildly fluctuated over many years in our region, and I guess we'll just have to go with those fluctuations into the future. It will be part of our economy, but we've grown things like dairying, we've grown things like tourism, and even though that's taken a hit with the international visitors, a lot of domestic visitors, Kiwis, coming to look at our region. So when I go around and have been talking to many businesses, many of them are way ahead of what they were last year. They think they'll have a good summer, and then beyond that, that will depend, I guess, on how the world manages COVID and how we do that. But as a country, I think we're a lot better off than most in the world. And as a region, the West Coast and Tasman, we're based on a lot of primary industry activity, and we're going really well.
And a huge boost with AgFest, of course, next month. Very much looking forward to heading over to that as well. Now, Damien, you've got a lot of new fresh faces in the Labour Party that have been elected in their own right around the regions. The Labour Party did not have a lot of elected regional seats 3 years ago. How will you ensure, as Minister of Agriculture, should you have that portfolio again, which we'll assume, that they stay connected, that they don't get caught up in Wellington and stay connected to the true needs of their rural communities?
Hopefully they do it better than the National Party MPs that they beat, because clearly there was a disconnect there. And so these new MPs from the Labour Party, that they've obviously connected with the community to get the votes. They've been out around the provincial towns and rural areas, and there's lots of theories on why we got the vote. I think good leadership. I think it was endorsement of our COVID management, and the fact that we have a vision and a plan to go ahead. So all those MPs, they'll be new, they're enthusiastic, they're very, very capable, lots of talent there, and I'm sure that they'll be continuing to connect with their communities and representing their views. For me, that's a lot more people who have connection to the rural industries, and they'll be there to support me as direct representatives from those electorates.
How much do you believe that the Greens and New Zealand First helped Labour get across the line from what happened in the last 3 years?
Look, we had a pretty functional working coalition government, and that was with both New Zealand First and the Greens. We saw a huge number of good positive things for our economy, with the Provincial Growth Fund from New Zealand First, was encouragement around water and biodiversity, even though some may see it as a negative. Long term, those are the things that we need to manage properly with the Greens, and we'll continue to work with them. They are still in government, and New Zealand First unfortunately isn't. So, people will be doing analysis of the outcomes of that for those parties. For us in Labour, it's for us to get on and govern, put out a plan, continue to follow it through, and make sure that we represent all New Zealanders to deliver a better New Zealand than we have in the past, not just to build it back to where it was, but actually to make it better. And that means more benefits for New Zealanders, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of where they live.
Now, Damien, you sat there 9 years beating away, ready for your turn, and many in rural New Zealand said, Damien, we love you, you're with the wrong party. You came in, you had your 3 years. I'm sure the book was, the to-do list was very long, and 3 years isn't really long enough. It has been discussed heavily to extend that term. But let's work through some of those things that you are most proud of that you have achieved in such a short amount of term. Before we get into what's next?
I guess the first thing that was thrown at us, a bit of a curveball, was Mycoplasma bovis. And with the support of my colleagues, we committed to eradicate it. And I think we're a long way down the track to do that. Still a lot of work ahead of us. We've sorted out the NATE system. We've certainly got more people committed to it. And if we can beat that disease, I think that's one achievement that we should be rightfully proud of. I think we've moved on. Fit for a Better World is a process that took some time, but it was one driven by the industry, and people who had a vision came together and said, where are we heading with all our efforts on farm and across the primary sectors? That does lay out a vision for us, and it's to get more for what we do, not just get us to do more, because we were starting to reach limits, in terms of the numbers of people we had to work in our sectors. We're struggling to get more of them. Some of the environmental pressures, some of the capital, that we've required for land ownership, and the banks have been squeezing a lot of people. So within those constraints, we have to build a better world and encourage more younger people into it. And that Fit for a Better World is perfect timing, particularly as COVID's come along. It's challenged a lot of what we've done, and it means that we have to change it into the future and be more resilient. Wool, I would like to have made more progress on that, but that's underway now. We've got a big campaign to get young New Zealanders into agriculture. We've got Taratahi and Telford up and running again, really important. There's a lot of good stuff that we've done, but we've still got lots to do.
Yeah, and absolutely. What will those main priorities be in your first, say, 100 days?
Look, I think getting that wool program continued on and running. I think getting the right settings for attracting young people. We've got seasonal pressures on horticulture. We've heard from them. We're discussing it with them, but we can't open the doors to foreign workers because of the risk of COVID. So what we have to do is work with the people we have and try and encourage them to have it not just a short-term job, but a career. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. An underlying one is succession on farms, and it's harder and harder for young people to start out in agriculture and realistically think that they can buy a property. We've got to somehow work with the banks, work with other institutions around the place to make sure that it still can be a realistic goal. There will always be a few who do it, but increasingly it's harder for people. And whether that motivation is the one that needs to drive innovation into the future, or whether we think that corporate farming and people just working on them is the way of the future, it's a discussion that we have to have. And I think I'd love to see opportunities for people to own land. Anyone who's been on a farm or comes from a farming background understands it. Māori ko te wanga waiwai. There's a connection to the land that drives passion and it drives innovation, and it's the kind of commitment that's got us to where we are in agriculture, and I think needs to continue to take us into the future.
Now, let's talk about this with regards to the labour shortage and our connection as a country to the backbone of our economy that we do not want to take with arrogance, but to attract people into this, there is leadership in who is coming across the border and who isn't. There has been announcements that potentially headline acts for our music festivals will. Kirsten Dunst, who's coming here filming, can bring her nanny, yet we aren't allowed to bring in essential workers such as shearers. How will you be able to change the sentiment with your portfolio about the importance of agriculture and the primary industries being a part of our economic recovery?
Well, we have been able to bring essential workers in. That's incorrect what you say there. We're allowing vets in, making sure the process works properly. We're looking at shearers. We've had agricultural contractors come in. We're looking very carefully at that as we have some capacity in the system. But those who want to just open the doors for people to come in, it's not possible. We're looking at things like RSE, where we've had up to 14,000 people from RSE countries or from the Pacific countries. That's not possible. We've got people now in New Zealand who've been on working holiday visas. We've extended those visas and made them more flexible. So there's a lot of work going on to address those labour shortages. And I guess there's a market reality as well that we've got to make it more attractive for young New Zealanders to go and, as I say, not just take the short-term jobs, but look realistically at careers in our sectors.
Okay, we are running out of time. The last question I do want to put to you is there was a lot of theory around to keep out the extreme greens. Where do you believe your relationship to be able to have those open and honest conversations with the Ministry for the Environment alongside the practicalities of the Ministry for Primary Industries to see forth how you will see out some of these regulations such as freshwater?
Look, I guess, there'll always be people with extreme views, and we'll now have ACT with quite a few people in there. They have extreme views on economic policy and what should be done, deregulation, etc. So as a government, as a Labour government, we'll have to deal with all those different opinions within Parliament, as we always do. And within Ministry for the Environment, there are not extreme views, there are different views on how things should be done. And that's always a constant kind of tension between government departments to make sure that we get it about right. Sometimes we don't. We have to make the adjustments. I've said it on freshwater. We just have to make the adjustments where necessary to make sure that we can practically implement them and get to the right outcome. And I think most people in rural New Zealand, and many of those people who voted, actually believe that we do need to have more sustainable management. We make sure we have good animal welfare standards. We make sure we have good standard when it comes to water quality. And that endorsement, through the ballot box, I guess says that we have to continue in this direction. Just make sure we can do it realistically and practically.
And the door is wide open to working with the primary industries across the board in those practical solutions.
Of course, they always are. And, everyone has to be realistic, though. Just because you can't get what you want doesn't mean to say there hasn't been consultation. Life is a compromise, but ultimately, if we agree on the objective, then we have to sit down and make sure that we get it as right as we can anyway.
Sorry, Damien, just before you go, one thing I did take from a positive that Jacinda Ardern does intend to utilise her popularity globally to forefront trade over the next term. How much of importance do you believe that is for this change of nationalism we're seeing across the board, and what, of course, is happening with the US and a potential global recession as well?
Look, I've just come off to our, it was a Zoom, or not Zoom, but it was a video conference link with APEC ministers in terms of food security. And trade was an important part of that. And so, look, it's a global discussion in terms of the APEC ministers and APEC countries' economies. Really important part of say, feeding our people, making sure that they get access to good nutrition is being able to trade, but also helping them with production systems, making sure we reduce waste. So we are working on this collaboratively, and I think that what Jacinda has done internationally is outstanding, showing a bit of leadership, trying to be kind, putting the health of the people first, and ensuring that when we get that right, actually our economy flows on positively from that. And so I think that's the kind of leadership the world needs. And hopefully we can be, if not the best country in the world, the best country for the world, and trying to lead with that kind of, kindness.
Damien O Connor, Minister for Agriculture and freshly elected West Coast Tasman MP following the recent New Zealand election.
This is Sarah's Country.